I come and talk with you. And she was our corps officer up until a few years ago. And so, yeah, it's a real privilege. And to be honest, I feel a little bit as though I'm probably already talking to a group of women that are undoubtedly quite pastoral. And so I think...
Sorry, my fault.
Thank you. Yeah, so the things that I'm going to talk through really are just a series of thoughts that I've been mulling over the last couple of years, particularly in my role as a schools chaplain. But also I think they're principles that sort of underpin really good pastoral care. But before I begin properly, I just wanted to let you know about the chat feature. Can you give me a little nod if you've used the chat feature before on Zoom? Okay, that's fine. So if you look towards the bottom of your screen and just hover your arrow, you ought to see a little chat button. It says chat and it's got a little speech mark. And if you click on that, there's Ava saying hi to everybody. You can type in there anything that you want to really, and I think I am going to refer to that at some point and ask you to maybe put something in that chat feature if you want to, of course. So yeah, if I'm referring to the chat feature, and I think later on some of my sort of key quotes that I've chosen, which I think are really lovely, I'm also going to put into there, because for me as a very visual person, it sometimes just helps to be able to see those things just in front of us. So there you go. And then if you want to close it again, there's a tiny little arrow at the top of the chat feature on your screen. If you press that little down arrow, you can close it and it'll disappear on your screen again. So yeah, just if you want to use the chat feature. Okay, so first things first, really, a bit about me. I am employed by the Salvation Army as a schools chaplain, and I work in a school in Bradford with a secondary school, which is also a sixth form college. And I work really with challenging young people, vulnerable students, students with anxiety, mental health conditions, and my role really is primarily pastoral care, but is also about nurturing and leading students into the Christian faith. It's a Church of England school, and it is the best job in the world. I could do a whole talk about it, but I'm not gonna, because that's not what we're here for. But yeah, I think for me, the thing that I really love about it is the challenge of connecting with teenagers on a deep and meaningful level. So speaking into their lives, empowering them to feel listened to in this cultural moment that they're facing. There is so much vying for the attention of teenagers, as there is for us all. So yeah, being among them, journeying with them, that is something that I love to do. And so my first thing, I love this title, Soul Whispering, and it's been something that I've been thinking about for a while. I like the fact that Zena's given me this title of Meaningful Relationships Creator. I didn't give myself that title, but I want to get like a badge or a little something with it on, because you know, whilst I don't consider myself that at all, it is something that, yeah, I think we should all aspire to, is to be meaningful relationship creators. So I really like that. So my first thing that maybe you could put into the chat feature is, what do you think the phrase soul whispering means? What did you think when you saw the title of Soul Whispering? What kind of things spring to mind to you when you hear that phrase? Because I'm still looking for a way to articulate that. And I'm gonna put in there what I think, but it would be really helpful to just share and learn from each other what it might mean to be a soul whisperer, or what it might mean to have our souls whispered to. Cool. So yeah, it's good. A spiritually led listener. Yeah, I like that. The listening aspect is really cool. So yeah, anything that you think of, really, just keep popping them in as they go. And I'll pop what I think in a moment. So for me, I've tried to articulate, and I think with anything like pastoral care or spiritual leadership, sometimes finding a language for it can be quite difficult. So I've tried my best to do that. And this is my definition of soul whispering. It's to connect with someone's innermost self in a way that leads to transformation or realization about who they are, and perhaps the direction in which they need to move. It can feel like a spark has been lit in our hearts, but it isn't always the most comfortable thing. It can be disarming for the person whose soul is being whispered to. It's characterized by gentleness and truth. And through these interactions and soul whispering conversation, lives can be changed. So that's my little idea about what I think it means to be a soul whisperer. I'm going to just put that in there for you to see. And it was interesting actually, because I really think that this is the kind of group that Zena wants to nurture, that kind of conversation. We were just speaking about it before. I really think that meaningful and deep conversation is life-changing, and yeah, so that's quite a timely thing that we discussed that, I think. So a recent example that I want to share with you about where I recently had my soul whispered to was I was in the car with a friend, and I'd been in the middle of a conflict in my life where I found myself playing peacekeeper. I don't know if there's any of you that are peacekeepers in your family. I've always played that role in my family from quite a young age. And I also was having some anxiety over family illness as well, and returning to my job in a school after a global pandemic, which has its challenges. And I'd spent the week asking this friend I was in the car with, asking him to pray for the other people in my life. Will you pray for my parents? Will you pray for this person? And when I'd finished telling him and updating him how these other people were, he turned to me and he said, Emilie, you've been asking for prayer for all these other people, and you've been carrying such a lot when you should have been asking me to pray for you. And it was this really wonderfully disarming moment where my internal struggle was seen, it was validated, it was drawn out into the open, and it helped me to see something that was true of myself through this lens of love. But more importantly, it gave me permission to have a moment of brokenness. And I love that idea, to be somebody that gives permission to allow brokenness instead of rushing away. And so I think another way of looking at this idea of soul whispering is to consider, I don't know if we've got any horse lovers. Any horse lovers out there? No, that I'm not either. Oh, kind of. We feel all right about them. Yeah, you'll have heard the phrase horse whispering, and that's really where I took this idea of soul whispering from. And horse whisperers are notoriously sort of known as people that are gifted to be able to tame creatures twice or three times the size of them and soften their behavior over time. And in school, I have sometimes been referred to as a child whisperer. I'm not sure I like that phrase, because it makes me think of the child catcher instead of it being positive. But yeah, this idea that there are some elements in horse whispering that I think can be helpful in dealing with difficult people, or dealing with people that are reactive by nature, and dealing with people that have a difficult temperament. So some of these things for me would include first gaining trust through vulnerability, to gain trust with another person by stepping up and being close to the individual in a way that might risk you being hurt. And that is really key when it comes to teenagers. They can be so rude. I'll give you some stories. They can be so rude. But yeah, the idea of getting close enough that, you know, you're putting yourself on the line for others, and gaining trust by making yourself vulnerable. And I wonder if you can think of somebody in your own life that other people might have already written off. I think we can all think of maybe negative people in our lives that we wouldn't go to for certain things because we know that they'll be negative, or they might be moaners, or the Eeyores of life, if you're a Winnie the Pooh fan. We all, I think, know people like that, and we all probably know people that others may write off as, you know, I'm not going to go there with that person. And so I think gaining trust through vulnerability is important, but I think taking a chance and persevering is a key aspect of meaningful relationships, and not the kind that's just getting knocked down and getting back up again, but a gentle persistence. If you think of that horse whispering analogy, this gentle persistence to see breakthrough with somebody, and celebrating the journey and the process. So I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story about a girl that I worked with in school recently. I got a radio call. We have radios. There's some quite worrying negative behaviour in the school that I work in. So we have these support officers. Some of them are ex-prison officers. That's the kind of children that we're working with. Yeah, I was radioed to come and pick up a girl who'd had a run-in with the headmaster, and I brought her back down to where I work, which is called the Sanctuary. It's a little Salvation Army porter cabin, really, but it is a sanctuary. She'd been told off about dropping some litter, and she'd given back chat, and she was notorious among her teachers for always having a scowl on. She always looks as if she just doesn't like you and has a general look of disdain about her. But yeah, we sat and chatted for a little while, and as I persevered really gently with her, it transpires that acting out behaviour was actually because she'd been moved from another school after an incident with the police, and she was desperately anxious about being in trouble because she really wanted to settle in this second school, and she really wanted to be given a second chance, and to be told, to be shouted at, and to be in the face of authority in the way that she was a really fearful moment for her. And I think so often with teenagers, that behaviour, that acting out, does come from a place of fear. And I also think that's very true of adults. I work with children that have had very adverse childhood experiences, but I think we probably all know adults that have maybe never worked through some of their trauma from childhood or growing up. I think a lot of our behaviour, as you'll all know, stems from places of fear sometimes. So that's just a little story about gentle persistence, helped to reveal what was really going on, that deep beneath the iceberg analogy. And I think that is the kind of persistence we need in pastoral care. So I'm going to characterise some of the key things that I think people that are soul whisperers have. But I don't think it's something that that you just are, because I think a lot of time people say, oh, they're so pastoral, they're a really pastoral person. I don't think it is something that you just are. I think it's something that we practice, we reflect upon, and we hone our pastoral care. So the first thing for me is a reflective self. The self that we have reflected on is our greatest asset in caring relationships. So this idea that reflecting back on learned experience consistently can really help us inform how to care for others, and being careful that it's not in a way that is always projecting our own experience onto another person. So there's nothing worse than if someone is grieving and you bring up your own experiences of grief as though it's the same. But understanding the places that you, during a struggle, have found hope and have found healing. I think when we acknowledge that where did I find hope? Where did I find healing in the valleys of my life? And therefore, how can I signpost this individual to find those things as well? And I know for me, that's been in my personal faith, but it's also been in support networks, acknowledging who those life-giving friendships are. And when we reflect on our own experience consistently, daily, we are helping to inform pastoral care for others. So that is the reflective self. And the second one really for me is the idea that our beloved self leads to a loving self. And yeah, I think that is absolutely key. I'm doing lots of copying and pasting here, but it's helpful for me to see it in front of me. Yeah, the idea that we need to first believe that we are beloved, because that leads to loving. And knowing our purpose, knowing we are beautifully and wonderfully made, holding firmly and securely to the identity of ourself as beloved helps us to love so much better. And I think otherwise, our own self-esteem will rise and fall on the judgment of others or on how helpful we are to them. And I've seen some people in pastoral care, tripping over themselves. Their belovedness actually comes from the pastoral care that they give, which is no good, because we are a limited self, and we need to know and accept our belovedness, but also our limitations. And so it says, one of my favorite pieces of scripture, I'm sure many of you know it, is Psalm 139, 13, that says, "You made all the delicate inner parts of my body and knit me together. Thank you for making me so wonderfully complex. Your workmanship is marvelous. How well I know it." And that's the New Living Translation. But I like to start the day by affirming myself, really. That sounds very narcissistic, I know. But just this idea of, when we're interacting with others, asking yourself, am I loving others from a place of belovedness? I think that's so important. It's really obvious to see when somebody isn't living in their identity as a beloved person. And for those that aren't Christians, it isn't necessarily just about knowing that from God. It's about knowing who are the people that know my vulnerable places, that know me so well, and that still love me, and searching for where that belovedness in our lives comes from. So yeah, our belovedness leads to the loving self. I want to give a quick example about how secure you need to be working in a high school. And that's a teenage girl who one day I went in with my Salvation Army witness wear on. And it's not the most attractive kind of gear to wear, particularly in a high school, that when they're all about aesthetics. And I was walking down the corridor, and one of the girls that I work with said, "Emilie, don't wear that again. You look like a boy." So they really do. I mean, they do say it how it is. They really do. But, because when you're working with students like this, you have to sometimes give back as much as you get. I think I turned around and said, "Well, funnily enough, I didn't dress to impress you this morning." And it is that kind of, I joke about that sort of thing, but it is that thing of, actually, if my self-esteem was to rise and fall on the judgment of teenagers, I would never have taken the role. I think that's so important, just for those that we're journeying with. Okay. Yeah, the next thing that I wanted to say, really, and I saw a lovely thing about this on Facebook the other day, is this idea of being strong but gentle, and that gentleness is actually a form of strength. I was given an analogy, or I read an analogy, I think it was in a book called Personhood and Presence. and it's about pastoral care, that when we pastor other people, we ought to speak as though blowing a butterfly off your sleeve, strong enough to move it, light enough not to hurt it. I love that analogy. Strong enough to move it, but light enough not to hurt it. Since I read those words, that's just stayed with me in most of the encounters that I have. And so I think to be a soul whisperer sometimes means to ask the pervasive questions that other people might not dare to ask, to talk about how all-consuming grief can be. If ever there's a time that we need to be soul whisperers, it is in the midst of a global pandemic where we have seen people lose loved ones, but not only that, not be able to properly grieve for them, not be able to embrace loved ones, but just to acknowledge and sit with people in the very real feeling of emotion. And to ask those questions. How are you actually doing? I asked a friend from church not so long ago, how are you really doing since you unexpectedly lost your brother 3 years ago? And I was amazed that nobody had asked him that question. And I think that is a lesson, to be courageous. Not to just ask out the blue, but when that moment comes, to be courageous to ask those questions that allow brokenness. And a great example of this, I think, is where taken from the Bible, where Jesus meets the woman at the well. He goes and sits at a well, and there's a Samaritan woman there. And first off, Jesus says, will you draw me some water? Which is quite an interesting statement in himself, that he, as light of the world, asks for someone else to serve him. So I think in pastoral relationships, we are also always receiving and being served. It's definitely a dialogical thing. But this idea that she went to the well not fully realizing that her soul needed more, that she went there actually wanting. She found something at that well that she didn't know her soul needed. And the way that Jesus speaks to her, he's completely open with her about the fact he knows she's had 4 husbands. And yet he doesn't say it in this judgmental way. He says, I know you've had 4 husbands. And she suddenly, oh, he knows that about me. He's telling me something about me that I already know to be true. And yet he draws it out of her. And I love the idea that this well is a metaphor for our soul, something deep being drawn out of it that we already know within us, but another person gently draws it out of us. And I think that's a great biblical analogy, actually, for soul whispering. I'm nearly done. Yeah, and I think, so to reiterate that, really, when we engage in pastoral relationships well, we're changed by every encounter that we have. And to reiterate, strong but gentle. I saw a really lovely night blessing. I don't know if anyone's ever seen the night blessings before. It's from I think it's from a pastor who just writes lovely blessings to read before you go to bed. It talked about the idea that water is a fluid state, and over time it wears away at hard rocks to refine them, to smooth them, and to reshape them. And I love the idea that to be gentle and to be fluid and to be flexible is actually to be strong. Sometimes we underestimate, we think of gentleness as timidity. Gentleness is strength, and you can tame creatures 3 times your size with gentleness. And so, I think that's a really beautiful analogy. And my final key thing that I think really is important for pastoral care or meaningful relationships is the hospitable self. I often joke that I'm not very good at hospitality, in the sense that we've got a really small living room. So when people come round, we don't have a dining table. And when people come round, we have, you know, food on our laps, and someone usually has to sit on the floor because there's not enough sofa space. And we've been really blessed and privileged to have lots of friends that have lovely big houses. So we just get to go around and eat all their food, which is brilliant. I'm a bit of a freeloader in that respect. But I think when we think about the word hospitality, we immediately go to this idea of opening up our homes and serving food, making a good cup of tea. And I think they are all wonderful things to do. But for me, being a true host is to be in a state of hospitality. I think that hospitality is a state of mind, and that actually it is where we lovingly linger in limbo. That's a little tongue twister that I've created there. The idea of lovingly lingering in limbo. To linger in the places where other people might hurry away, and to walk slowly, to show people that you have time for them. There's just nothing worse than feeling that someone's not fully with you when you're in conversation, or feeling that they're rushing away because they've got something more important to do. I think that true hospitality is to be a person who is open to other perspectives, has open heart, is slow to speak, and wants to just linger. Often I think soul whisperers, you'll find, being the ones that hang around to clear up, are the ones that just wait to see if there's, just pause to just wait to see when you've asked that "how are you doing" question, if a little bit more comes. So yeah, I think, yeah, being a safe person, to be somebody that, you know, when you go to an environment where you know there's going to be lots of people, we all like to have that one person that we can sit near, that we think, I'll be okay if that person's there. I'll be okay if I can sit near them. And to be a soul whisperer is to be that safe person where someone can come up to you and sidle up next to you and know that even if you don't speak, they feel safe in your presence. I think that's a really wonderful gift. And that's something that teenagers, in social times, they desperately want to know. If I've got that one friend that I can stand with, then I'll be okay. And I think that's part of being hospitable, and hospitality being a state of mind, not just being a brilliant cook. So I think I'm off the hook when it comes to that. So those are really all the thoughts that I had prepared. Of course, when it comes to pastoral care, there's limitless things, and I'd love to hear what you guys think. But I've also just got a few questions that I thought that might just help to inform our discussion a little bit, and mostly just because I'm quite nosy and I think I'd like to know the answer to these questions. So this is the first one. Can you think of a time in your life where someone has whispered to your soul, or where you've been pastorally cared for in a way that was transforming for the situation you were in? And what about that pastoral care stands out to you? That's my first point that I'd love to discuss. Back to you, Zena.
Right. If you want to join in the conversation, if you want to unmute yourself, can I say, while we're all thinking about it and finding the buttons, I don't know how old you are, Emilie, but you're extremely spiritually mature. I've so enjoyed hearing what you have to say. I don't know if anybody else thinks it, but you're a very, very spiritual person. Beautiful, beautiful words you've spoken. But what was the first question? Sorry, could you repeat it again for us?
So the first question, can you think of a time in your life where someone has whispered to your soul, or where you've been pastorally cared for in a way that was transforming for you? And what about that pastoral care stands out to you?
Anybody?
I can do that one.
Yeah.
Hi, You're right, sweetheart.
Seeing you again.
Sorry I was so late. My computer is dying, but it keeps lingering. You know, it's in that place at the moment. Yeah, well, a long time ago, but a difficult time, and some really hard challenges. And the person that came to my aid was one of 5 who I'd actually spoken to about the problem. Now, when you speak about your problems as well, it's making yourself very vulnerable. And, you know, you're trusting somebody with something that's really, you know, deep for you. So the first 4 people kind of let me down a little bit because they sympathized and, you know, suggested I was in the right, the other people were in the wrong, and, you know, and all of it sided with me, if you like. It's not what I wanted or needed at that particular time. I needed to know how I deal with it and how I move on from it. And so the one person that really did help was the one person who said, talk to Jesus. And when you're talking to him, visualize that he's actually suffered all the same things. So betrayal, injustice, all of those things, he's actually experienced them. So when you talk to him, know that he understands, and know that, you know, that he's the way he dealt with those things, you can do the same, and you can come through this. And it was the one thing that I needed to hear, and it spoke to me, because I wasn't in the right. Nobody ever is 100% in the right, are they? It's always a bit of one and a bit of the other. So I needed to hear that, rather than you're all right really, or it's not your fault, or all those other things that would have been pacifiers, but not spiritual helps, not pastoral help. So yeah, that's really been important in my own development. Yeah. And yes, she is an extremely mature spiritual young lady.
Yeah.
20s, is it? How old are you then?
Yeah, 28.
28.
Oh, you're lovely. I can think of some spiritual whispering, and there have been probably 3 occasions when this gentleman, who's no longer with us, from Hadley, has said just the right thing at the right time in a quiet way, and every single time was in Safeways, or what is now Morrison's. And I think when someone can come alongside you when you're obviously fitting in one of those jobs that you need to do, and you're fitting it into a very stressed life, and can sense from how you are and know your situation without you having to say too many words, but can say probably 2 or 3 sentences of wisdom that send you down the cheese aisle feeling better. That to me is a soul whisperer. I think for people who know, this was Sid Whitehouse. And every single time I bumped into him in what was Safeways, he knew just the right thing to say and how to say it. And that meant a lot to me. And those words have been remembered, even though it was in the middle of my shopping.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to put another question in.
Go on then.
And this is quite a difficult one to answer, I think. But it might even just be something to think about. In what kind of social situation would you find yourself wanting to rush away? Is there a particular person? Obviously, don't answer that one. Particular person that you find difficult to be around, or a scenario where you felt uncomfortable, and what's the root fear or concern that you have about those situations? I know for me, I was really extrovert actually when I met my husband at university, and I always used to say, oh, you know, let's go out and let's go and like join with people, let's go out and eat, let's go to all the social things. And he used to always say, okay, but let's make sure we're home by 10 o'clock. And I'd be like, that's not really the point of socializing. And then bizarrely, I know Marion can testify to this, when we moved back home and started going to church together back where I live at Castleford, he became so much more confident. He became the one that loved to socialize. He would circulate the room at church, and I became a bit more introverted actually, and I became a bit more retreating. And so yeah, I just wonder whether anyone can name a particular thing that they think I'd want to rush away if this happened.
There are definitely people you see coming and you want to go the other way, definitely.
We're all wondering if that's us now, Marion.
Nobody, present company exempt. No.
But it is interesting just to notice I am myself all the time. I can't be anything else, but I come out differently in different settings. So together, obviously, with some people, I'm really intelligent and brilliant, even pretty. And in the company of other people, I'm just stupid and I don't come up with anything clever to say. So of course, the setting, what you describe, it actually affects us. And from that, we could probably draw conclusions. What happened with me in this setting or in that setting? And obviously in the family, we are the wife or the girlfriend, or we are the sister or the daughter or the mother or something. And that brings out certain things of us, what is expected and how to act and how to take care or take responsibility and so on. So I think it's interesting to study yourself. You said something about that in the beginning, to be aware of yourself. And I think we could learn maybe from what happened to me when I entered this situation. And I know, being an officer, that it's a very official job. And as long as I am expected to be official, that's all right, because then I know what to do. But it could be harder to come into another setting where I don't know the rules or the game. And then I could be very beige, trying to just blend in with the wall. And I don't think that means that we are unreal. I think it's more about just in different situations, we actually bring out different aspects of our personality.
Yeah, being flexible, isn't it? It's that flexibility as well, because there are some students that I have to find a level of allowing behaviours that I would never expect from some students, but deciding on which level you need to operate with particular individuals in order to be able to love them well. I think that's something that I'm learning. How much do I have to let go of behaviour with this student in order to be able to see get to that soul whispering relationship, I think. Yeah. I do have one more question before I'll let Zena fully take over.
Yours.
This was just my favourite analogy. I think it's been one of those sort of life-shifting things that I've read that's really permeated quite deeply for me in the way that I speak to individuals. So can you think of a conversation with a person who has spoken to you in a way that is blowing a butterfly off your sleeve, strong enough to move it, light enough not to hurt it, sorry. And I saw a proverb, I think, came up recently that said, an open rebuke is better than hidden love. And I know I talked about a little bit sometimes trying to ask those questions or say those things that other people might not be brave enough to say. And I really like that idea of a conversation where I don't know if you've had them. I've had them with lots of spiritual leaders where they've said something that's kind of unsettled me, and I've been like, oh, they can really see that aspect of my personality that I maybe didn't want them to see. But then I've gone away and thought they did that in a way that's challenged me. And yeah, I just wondered if anyone can think of that happening to them, really.
All very quiet. I think probably I have, but sometimes you can't always remember them, can you? Because they've been so gentle that they've just kind of gently jutted you to one side rather than completely disturbed you. But I don't know if anyone else can think of anyone particularly that. No.
I think there's something very beautiful when you find a relationship where it's a mutual thing, where you do that for each other, because you can feel very safe in that environment, can't you? It's if you're not always giving out to a person who's perhaps, you know, showing a lot more weakness, and they're not always having to give out to you, but there's almost a mutual balance. I think that's a very safe and gentle place to be.
I should say Maurice is very good at that.
Yeah.
Sometimes she'll turn to me and say, "Rein it in, Zena," in a very gentle way.
We all need it, don't we, sometimes?
All very quiet. Yeah. Do you have any more questions, or one that we can?
No, I don't think I've not got any more specific questions, really. I know those questions are quite difficult. They're almost things to ponder over, aren't they? Things to go away and think about. So it's difficult, to expect, you to suddenly share those things. But they're things that I often find myself reflecting on. I mean, I guess really just if there's anything. Is there anything in particular that stood out to you about what you think good pastoral care is? Because I'm still really learning, so I'd like to know.
Got something, Anne? Who's looking for you?
Just trying to take the button off. I couldn't find it.
Yeah, that's all right.
I was saying that I was going to think that actually it's more challenging in these times regarding pastoral care, when actually you're not seeing anyone face to face. And I particularly haven't seen anybody for a long time, you know, sort of like this. That's why I came on today, so I could see people I know and share, you know, some experiences. But where I teach in school, it's all very much disjointed, because you're in your bubble, and I'm in my sweet corner, and I'm seeing people, but you mustn't get too close, and you know, you're almost frightened to have any conversations, you know. However, they're mainly younger children, and they are so I mean, I've just gone back to work after a stroke, so you know, they are so pleased to see me. And it's lovely to be able to just share with them, you know, at their level, you know, how my, you know, how, yes, I'm feeling a lot better, and yeah, you know, God's good, and you know, and of course we're just coming into doing I'm doing all the Christmas stuff, so we've got, you know, the children saying, well, and I was saying, do you know the Christmas story? Of course you're not meant to teach them that, are you? But I am, because I just feel that you know, if they ask questions, I have the answers. I want to try and talk to them. So pastoral care at school is different for me, obviously, than it would be for you. But I find that you've got to be a listening ear. That's why I was saying originally, what is a soul whisperer? I think you have to be a good listener, and really listen to what they're saying rather than what you think they're saying, and not put your interpretation and slant on what you think they're saying, but actually listen and let them come to you. And yeah, that's what I'm doing.
Yeah, I totally agree. Attentive listening. We all have that challenge of pastoral care with masks on now, don't we? So on the first day for year 7s, I was with my eyebrows trying to show that I'm a friendly person. I think I just looked a bit crazy because I was like this. Eyebrows. It's definitely a challenge not being able to show that physicality and the smile that you,
yeah. I hate that because I'm a smiler, and so when you just see this, and I was seeing well, I've been watching a lot of home television. You know, this morning was quite good, but this morning it was talking about what can you do to your eyes to show that you are actually expressive, and what can you put. They were talking about things to put on yourself, but actually it got me thinking about actually how you can communicate with just your eyes. And that's really challenging, isn't it? You know, you start, I mean, I've got glasses on, but you start doing this, you know, what expression can I use with just my eyes? but it's still trying to put over through the mask or through the, you know, for you, an ability for people to know that it's okay to talk, because that's a barrier, isn't it? And that's a real challenge. Yeah.
I don't know whether anybody else listened to on Radio 2 I listened to Good Morning Sunday in Sunday morning, and I don't know if anyone else heard them talking to a gentleman who had been, he'd been an offender, and he'd been through a sort of a rehabilitation program, and he is now actually a mentor on that rehabilitation program. And he said one of the therapies that worked well within the prison setting that he found really useful was what they called equine ministry. They called it, I don't know if you heard of it, and they take a horse into the prison, and it's just the fact that the beast is bigger than the alter ego of the man that's in front of him, and that the presence of an animal that could really hurt you if it went the wrong way actually broke down the alter ego of the biggest sort of manly butch people that had massive egos, but it wasn't necessarily what was behind their egos, but being confronted with an animal that can sense your innermost feelings, whether you're afraid or whether you're a nervous person, whatever image you may be wanting to give off to your fellow prisoners, that beast knew the measure of you, and you needed to know the measure of him. And I found that really, in my mind, I was thinking, not that the beast is God, but sometimes we need that big presence of somebody who doesn't actually have to do much more than just be, to knock down our alter ego so that we can see the real person. He was a very rough and ready young gentleman, but he was amazing to listen to, and a lot of depth. No one else heard him, I don't think, but it made me think of it when you spoke, when you did today, Emilie.
Yeah, I do a lot of work with students that are in foster care, and one of the local therapies that they are sent for is like time with horses, and it's really interesting. One particular girl that I worked with last year, she was really challenging in school, but she'd go and spend time with the horses. It's a very similar thing of, you know, you just can't behave like that around horses. So they nurture this gentleness within them. Fascinating.
Yeah, it's interesting. Anybody else got any more thoughts? You've got a lot of you on mute. Anybody else got any more thoughts? No. Thank you ever so much for your thoughts. I don't know if we've all noticed it. Obviously, we have recorded it, so we want to go back and listen to what Emilie has to say. But also, we've learnt a new button since you've been with us, Emilie. We've learnt the chat button, and if you look on the chat, if you click on the chat button, there is a whole lot of input from people who've been here and Emilie's notes, so it's worth just having a little look. So when I loaded up on, does it go onto YouTube? Will the comments stay there?
That's a good question. That's not a question I know the answer to, unfortunately.
No, but it's worth having a little read down. The Lucy Kate has added some nice comments from I'm reading down, so do have a read. Anybody got anything else that they'd like to add to what Emilie said?
Huge thanks.
Yes, big thank you. Yeah, it's been lovely, very, very inspiring, and you're in our thoughts and prayers in your work at the moment. Obviously, it's a very difficult time for a lot of people, but you're in a situation where you can make a real difference to young people whose lives have been really impacted by this. I mean, none of us have been in a pandemic before, but I think for children and teenagers who are growing up through it, it's a real challenge for them. So we're thinking of you and praying for you in the work that you do, and really appreciate you joining with us today. It's been very inspiring.
Thank you.
Just yeah.
Sorry, I can hear.
Just out of curiosity, I mean, you know, the online worship that you're doing at Castleford. Are any of your school pupils opting in?
No, they're not actually. But
I'm
some of the staff members that I work with are, a couple of not churchgoers as well. I was, a particular lady who was really anxious about the pandemic, and I had the privilege of praying with her, and I just sent her the link, and there's a few of them that have seen it. It's not particularly tailored to younger end, I would say, but I am doing digital stuff with the children in school so that they still get some input as well.
We're just finding that with online worship, we're getting a wider audience than we would have normally had. It's appealing to different people.
Definitely.
I think that we're living in very challenging times. I think we've been given the knowledge of how to use some different ways to contact people and actually join together. And this is a gathering of ladies that we wouldn't have normally been able to achieve on one night. So it's really been lovely to have everybody here. Did I see you want to say something, Anne?
No, I just was saying thank you. I'm just talking,
Thank you for all of us. I would like to say, would one person like to pray, particularly for Emilie in her work, but just pray for us all? Would one person like to just close in prayer, please?
So Heavenly Father, we bring our hearts and our thoughts to you in prayer right now. And in a special way, we want to embrace Emilie, the task that she has to reach out to young people in a challenging school situation. First of all, we just give thanks to you for the opportunity to be present in the school. We know that that is not possible everywhere. So I just say thank you for open doors and opportunities and possibilities, but also knowing that it is a challenging world in the school, and especially maybe for teenagers. So I pray protection and guidance and wisdom for Emilie in all the different situations, thinkable and unthinkable, that could occur. I just pray that you will talk to her and whisper into her ear what she needs to know, what she needs to hear, listening to young people, and also what she needs to say. Thank you for already giving her so much knowledge, passion, and experience. And I pray that you will continue to give to her what she needs for the future. And for each one of us trying to reach out to people and listen to people that are close to us at work or in our family, among friends, I pray that you will make us good listeners, that we hear not just what is said, but also what is there between the lines, to understand and to catch what people try to express, emotions, thoughts, questions. And I just pray that you will give us the opportunity to understand when people really need help. Sometimes it is said so subtle, and it's not always easy to get what people really want to say. But we will be able to listen with your ears through your Holy Spirit, and that will guide us. So for each one of us, I pray your blessing be with us in these strange days, with all the pressure and all the extra stress that comes from the pandemic situation. Be close to each one of us and those who are dear to us. We pray, be with us and help us to be with you. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, Eva. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and particularly big thank you once again to Emilie. We really, really enjoyed it, and many blessings for all that you do. We will be meeting again on the 11th of November, Wednesday, the 11th of November, an easy one to remember. And Eva will be our guest on that night. We have another subject for Eva to bring to us then. So look forward to seeing you then. Many thanks again, Emilie, and thank you for all joining us. And God bless for everything that happens. Who knows what tomorrow is going to bring, but it's been lovely to see you and lovely to join together. Many blessings. Good night.
Good night.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Good night.
Bye.
Nice to see you, Claire.
Bye.
Thank you.
And Mary. And
Thank you.
Hello,
Bye.
Louise.
And Janet, are you going to bed there, Janet?
Yeah, I'm freezing.
Oh, okay. Good night. Good night.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night. Good night, Rosemary. Good night, dear.
Good night.
Good night. Good night. Good night.
Can't switch you off, Zena.
You're stuck all night now.
Night.
Good night. Good night. God bless. Bye.